Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are opening up a topic that sits right at the intersection of fascinating biology and
Like
just,
pure nightmare fuel.
yeah, that's the one, pure nightmare fuel. We are tackling Chapter 22 from Lippincott Illustrated Reviews, Microbiology, 4th edition.
It's good to be back. And yes, nightmare fuel is probably the correct clinical term for today's subject.
We're talking about helminths, which is,
Yeah.
the polite scientific way of saying worms.
Parasitic worms, to be precise.
And before we get into all the creepy crawly details, I want to start with a number from the text that actually, it stopped me in my tracks.
I think I know the one you mean.
It says that it is estimated that at least 70% of the world's population is infected with a parasitic helminth. 70.
It is a staggering statistic. I think, living in North America or Western Europe, we have this luxury of thinking of these things as, I don't know, a medieval problem.
Right, or something that only happens in remote jungles.
But the reality is, for most of human history, and for most humans alive today, coexisting with these organisms is just the norm.
The text mentions that specifically. It says the rarity here isn't because of our immune systems.
No, not at all.
It's almost entirely due to sewage treatment and sanitation.
Exactly. And for the medical students listening to this last-minute lecture, you have to understand these aren't just bugs that give you a stomachache.
They disseminate.
They disseminate. They can invade the brain, the lungs, the liver, the eyes. And understanding their life cycles is the only way to diagnose them.
So our mission today is to turn this very dense chapter into sort of a structured survival guide.
I like that. A survival guide.
Looking at the roadmap in Figure 22.1, the text divides them into 3 major families.
Right. Based on their shape, you've got the Cestodes, the Trematodes, and the Nematodes.
Or, in plain English,
The tapeworms, the flukes, and the roundworms.
let's start with the Cestodes, the tapeworms. Reading about their anatomy in Figure 22.2, it just struck me how stripped down they are.
They really are. They're just flat, ribbon-like, and segmented. But the most alien feature is what they lack.
They don't have a digestive system?
No mouth, no gut, nothing.
Which begs the question, right? How do they survive?
Well, they live in this soup of pre-digested food in our intestines, so why would they need one?
They just absorb nutrients directly through their skin, their cuticle?
Precisely. It's genius, in a way. They're the ultimate freeloaders. And this has clinical consequences. For example, one of the big 4, Diphylloathrium latum, the fish tapeworm.
Oh, right. It loves vitamin B12.
It soaks up so much that the human host can actually develop megaloblastic anemia. It's starving you from the inside.
Wow. And how does it stay in there with everything moving through the gut?
That's where the horror movie anatomy comes in. The head, or the scolex.
It's described as having hooks and suckers.
It's a grappling hook. It just anchors into the intestinal wall. And then the rest of the body, the strobila, is just a long chain of reproductive segments.
The proglottids. And this part is wild. Each one is a little hermaphroditic factory.
Male and female organs. They fill with eggs, break off, and pass in the stool.
Which is key for diagnosis. You're looking
Yeah.
for those little segments.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's run through the big 4 from Figure 22.3. We mentioned the fish tapeworm.
Then there's Echinococcus granulosus, the dog tapeworm.
And this one is different. It doesn't just stay in the gut.
No, this one's invasive. The larvae migrate to the liver or lungs and form these things called hydated cysts.
Fluid-filled sacs. And the text has a huge warning about these.
A massive warning. Do not puncture them. If a surgeon accidentally nicks one during removal,
Anaphylactic shock.
instant fatal anaphylactic shock from the release of worm antigens. It's incredibly dangerous.
That's terrifying. Okay, next up are the beef and pork tapeworms. Tachynia saginata and Tanina solium.
And here we go. This is probably the most important concept in the whole Cestodes section. If you're a med student, listen up.
It's the Tanina solium twist.
The pork tapeworm has a split personality. The disease you get depends entirely on what form you eat.
Okay, break it down. Scenario A.
In scenario A, you eat undercooked pork containing the larva.
The baby worm.
Right, it latches onto your intestine, grows into an adult tapeworm. You have toniasis. It's an intestinal infection. Annoying, but it stays in the gut.
Okay. Manageable. Now, scenario B.
In scenario B, you don't eat the pork. You eat food contaminated with human feces that contains the eggs of the tapeworm.
Fecal oral route.
Yes, and when you eat the egg, the parasite gets confused. It thinks you're the pig.
Oh, no.
The eggs hatch, the larvae burrow through your gut wall, get in your blood, and migrate.
And they go to the brain.
They love the brain. This is cysticercosis, an adult presenting with new onset seizures in many parts of the world. This is your #1 suspect.
So undercooked pork gives you a gutworm, but eating the eggs gives you brain cysts.
That is the last-minute lecture golden rule for tapeworms.
And before we move on, treatment. The book keeps mentioning praziquantel.
That's the magic bullet for cestodes and trematodes.
How does it work?
It increases the permeability of the worm cells to calcium. So you get this massive calcium influx, which causes spastic paralysis. The worm's muscles just seize up, it lets go of the wall, and your body gets rid of it.
Brutal. I love it. Okay, let's shift gears. Second group. The trematodes or flukes.
Visually, these are leaves, not ribbons. Flat, unsegmented, and usually pretty small.
And the one big association here, the vector.
The nails.
Always snails.
Always. Every single parasitic trematode has to pass through a freshwater snail. It's a non-negotiable part of their life cycle.
So the text divides them into ones you eat and ones that invade you.
Let's start with the eaters. The lung fluke, Paragonymous westermanni. You get that from undercooked crab or crayfish.
And the symptoms, a chronic cough with bloody sputum, can look like TB.
Exactly. Then you have the liver fluke, Clonorchis sinensis, from raw freshwater fish. It sets up shop in the biliary tract.
The liver's plumbing system.
And if you have a worm clogging that plumbing for years, you get inflammation, fibrosis, and a much higher risk of bile duct cancer.
Okay, so those are the eaters. Now let's talk about the schistosomes, the blood flukes.
Ah, yes.
Their invasion strategy is something else. You don't have to eat them.
No, you just have to go for a swim.
So what happens?
The infected snails release larvae called cercariae into the water. These little guys can digest human skin. They just drill right through you.
You're just wading in the water and they're burrowing into your legs?
Yeah, they get into your blood. And this is where it gets unique. Schistosomes have separate sexes, and their mating habit is, well, look at figure 22.4.
It looks like one thick worm holding a thin worm.
That's the male and female. The male has a long groove down his body, the schist. The female lives inside that groove. Permanently. Locked together, mating continuously for decades.
That is both impressive and deeply unsettling.
And they travel to specific places. S. mansoni and japonicum go to the GI tract, but S. hematobium goes to the veins around the urinary bladder.
And this is the one the text makes a huge point about.
Because the eggs penetrate the bladder wall. That chronic inflammation and fibrosis leads directly to squamous cell carcinoma of the bladder, a parasite that causes cancer.
A direct link. It's a major public health crisis in parts of Africa and the Middle East.
And the treatment is?
Praziquantel again. Works on flukes just like it does on tapeworms.
Okay, we've done ribbons, we've done leaves. Time for the final boss fight, the nematodes.
The roundworms.
As figure 22.6 shows, these are more complex. They're tubes, elongated, with a complete digestive system and a tough outer cuticle.
Right. And the text splits them into two squads. Tissue invaders and intestinal dwellers.
Let's do the tissue squad first. The bite squad, as the book implies.
First up, Onchocerca from the black fly. Causes river blindness.
Then Wuchereria bancrofti from mosquitoes. This is the one that causes elephantiasis.
Yes, the worms block the lymphatic system. You get that massive swelling.
Okay, but I have to stop on Loa Loa, the African eyeworm.
Yes.
Because the diagnosis is just visualizing the worm.
It's exactly what it sounds like. It migrates through your tissue, and sometimes it decides to cross the white of your eye.
So you look in the mirror and see a worm wiggling on your eyeball.
You do. It's psychologically traumatic, to say the least.
I think I just pass out. But speaking of manual removal, the guinea worm, Dracunculus medanensis.
A fascinating one. You drink water with infected copepods? The female worm grows to be 1 meter long inside you.
1 meter?
Yep. And then she migrates to your skin, usually your foot, and creates a burning blister.
And the only way out
is to wait for it to burst, grab the end, and slowly wind it around a stick, over weeks. If you pull too hard, it snaps.
And the text says this might be the origin of the medical symbol, the rod of Asclepius.
It's a very strong theory. That snake on the staff might just be a guinea worm.
That's incredible.
Ew.
Okay, let's bring it home. The intestinal nematodes.
The ones that stay in the gut. And for our listeners in the U.S., pay attention because we absolutely have these.
Number 1 being Enterobius vermicularis.
The pinworm. The most common helminth infection in the United States. Mostly kids.
And the life cycle is just deviously simple.
At night, the female worm crawls out of the anus and lays eggs on the skin.
which causes the main symptom, pruritus Annie.
An extremely itchy bottom. The kid scratches, gets eggs under their fingernails, puts their hand in their mouth, and the cycle starts all over.
And the diagnosis is the Scotch tape test.
Literally. Press tape to the area in the morning, stick it on a slide, and look for the eggs.
Okay, from the smallest to the largest. Ascaris lumbricoides, the giant roundworm.
A behemoth.
Yeah.
Earthworm-sized. Something like 1 billion people are infected.
But its migration path seems so needlessly complicated.
It's a wild ride. You swallow the eggs, they hatch, but then the larvae penetrate the gut wall and travel to the lungs.
So you get worms in your lungs.
Yes, which can cause a pneumonia.
Oh.
Then they crawl up your trachea.
Wait.
You cough them into your throat and you swallow them back down. Only then do they mature in the intestine.
So you have to cough up and swallow your own worms.
That is the life cycle. It's a terrifying journey.
Unbelievable. Okay, let's hit the hookworms, ancylostoma and neccugator.
The vampires. These guys have cutting plates in their mouths, and they latch on to suck your blood.
And they get in through your feet, right, walking barefoot on contaminated soil.
Direct skin penetration. Then they take that same trip up to the lungs and back down. But the key clinical sign here is anemia.
Iron deficiency anemia from the blood loss.
Exactly.
2 more, strongyloids and trichuris.
Trichuris is the whipworm. Can cause rectal prolapse and heavy infections. But strongyloids is the one I want to flag.
Why is that?
Because it can do something called autoinfection. It can complete its life cycle inside you.
Okay.
So if a patient becomes immunocompromised, gets high-dose steroids, for example, the infection can explode into hyperinfection syndrome. The worms disseminate everywhere. Brain, kidneys, all over. It has a very high mortality rate. It's a sleeping giant.
That's a crucial clinical pearl. So for these roundworms, we're not using praziquantel anymore.
No, the drug class changes. For nematodes, we use the bendazoles, albendazole, or mebendazole.
And how do they work?
They block the formation of microtubules in the worm cells.
So the worm can't absorb glucose.
It starves to death. It's a slower kill, but very effective.
Okay. We have waded through rice paddies and avoided raw pork. Let's wrap this up. If someone needs 3 golden rules from Chapter 22, what are they?
Rule 1. Cestodes are tapeworms. They absorb nutrients. The key is T-solium. Eating the meat is a gut worm. Eating the egg gives you brain cysts.
Rule number 2.
Trematodes are flukes, and they equal snails. Schistosoma hematobium causes bladder cancer. Treat them all with praziquantel.
And rule number 3.
Nematodes are roundworms. Pinworm is the itchy one. Ascaris takes a tour through the lungs. And watch out for strongyloids in immunocompromised patients. Treat these with albendazole.
You know, what's most compelling to me isn't just the medicine, it's the evolution. These things know our anatomy better than we do.
They absolutely do. They exploit our behavior, our diet, everything. It's a real reminder that public health, clean water, sanitation, shoes is the most powerful medicine we have.
A sobering thought. Wash your hands, cook your meat, and maybe don't drink water with copepods in it. Thanks for listening to this deep dive into Chapter 22.
Stay curious, everyone.
Catch you next time.